Hey guys, and welcome back once again to another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. I am your co-host, Ray Russell, bringing you yet another fun adventure on the ride back in time. This week, we continue on to tell the story of Bob's time working for the ICW, the Poffo family, as well as the fallout from Southeastern Championship Wrestling, All-Star Wrestling. And this week, guys, we're going to dive into it, talking about, as promised, the lawsuit filed by one Ronald Welch, a.k.a. Ron Fuller, against Ron Garvin, looking for the return of the Bayliner boat, perhaps the $12,000 he was loaned, and of course that Southeastern heavyweight title. We're going to get into all of that and so much more. But before we dive into the court proceedings, going to bring back onto the show the man himself, going to get his take on the entire situation. And if we have time, we're going to talk about a whole lot more. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Mr. Bob Roop.
Hey, Ray, man, it's good to be back on air. Seems like a while. And to you listeners out there, welcome. And I'm really glad you're back with us. We're back together again. This is my happy time of the week. I'm an old codger, semi-retired. I don't have a lot of things to do. But this is one that's really a pleasure because it takes me back to my glory days when I was active and I was doing. When you and I were talking before we came on the air, Ray, I was talking about the 15 years steady that I worked. I mean, my career was longer than that, but the first 15 years, I worked an average of about 350 days a year. Though Christmas wasn't off, New Year's wasn't off, Thanksgiving wasn't off, Mother's Day wasn't off. Yeah, you talk about going from full schedule. It's like going from a sawmill saw to a little handsaw. Yeah, it's good. So it's really a pleasure.
Well, we have this show, Bob, so we have some activity going for you in the world of pro wrestling again. So it's good to have you here and continue to tell these stories with you.
You know what's interesting? In the course of our stories, the stories we talk about, they might involve traveling thousands of miles. You can tell a story that covers the whole, which when we were talking about in Florida, that year in Florida where I was so busy, I don't know, I drove 100,000 miles that year, but we talked about it in like an hour and a half or maybe two shows, a couple hours or 3 hours. We were talking about activities that took 100,000 miles to get done. So it's just kind of interesting for me to look back at it that way. Of course, try to tell everybody, well, yeah, then on Tuesday I got in my car and I drove to the store and got a 7-Up and a Slim Jim. Then I drove to the town. I think that we wouldn't have many customers after about 10 minutes of that.
Well, if you kept records that meticulous, I would just be amazed, I got to tell you. But no, I mean, you guys, for every minute that we spend here talking about your history, there was 1,000,000 miles on the road for every minute we tell here. So there's so much left out there that we can go back again whenever something pops into your head. And before we started recording, we also reminisced a little bit about the old Sugar Hold Challenge, which took place during your tenure here in the ICW. And that is on the short list of what we're going to be discussing. In fact, it's next up after what we're going to discuss here today. And if time permits, maybe we'll get to the Sugar Hold Challenge later in this episode. If not, likely going to be as part of the next episode here in December of 2024. Can't believe it's almost a new year again, guys. But Bob, this week, I wanted to kick things off. I promised it last time out, and I wanted to get your take on some things because there's been so many stories told about the incident that involved Ron Fuller, a.k.a. Ron Welch, suing Ronnie Garvin. You guys leave Southeastern, you create All-Star Wrestling, and when Ronnie leaves, not only does he take Ron Fuller's Southeastern heavyweight title belt with him, well, he was the champion after all, but he also leaves with a boat, the Bayliner boat, the infamous Bayliner boat at this point. Of course, there was the tournament to crown the winner. The winner was going to get the boat, but in reality, Ron Garvin had went to Ron Fuller and said, hey, man, how's about loaning me some money here so I could put a down payment on a brand new boat that Garvin was living on by this point in time. And so that's where we're going to go this week, guys. We're going to go deep diving, Bob, back in time and discuss excerpts from the book Professional Wrestling and the Law, written by Alex B. Long, who's been on our regional wrestling show in the past, a great guest, a fun guy, and he is also a professor of law in Knoxville at the University of Tennessee, College of Law. Very, very educated man, but really fun. We had a lot of laughs too discussing this on the program he was on with me. And it's so fun. If you guys got to go check that book out, go right now on Amazon, Professional Wrestling and the Law, hundreds of pages. It covers everything from discrimination lawsuits going back decades ago to when the ladies and African Americans and whatnot were having to sue states and cities that weren't allowing them to wrestle. I mean, we're talking decades ago, Bob. And of course, all the way up to fan injury lawsuits going back to the 80s, the infamous one with the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette having issues with a fan at ringside and so on and so forth, all the way up to the Hulk Hogan Gawker lawsuit where he sued them, I believe, for showing his penis, brother, or something along those lines. So we've got so many things in that book to check out. But the very first topic in that book, Bob, is this one right here, the Ronnie Garvin, Ron Welch story.
Way to start. Well, it's, I think we have a brown paper bag again, don't we?
There is definitely a brown paper bag involved in, for all the parts of this story that may have been embellished over time, as silly as the brown paper bag sounds, that will definitely come into play as I begin to read some of these excerpts for sure.
I mean, I don't know how you could put like, say, $15,000 in cash into a brown paper bag and be carrying it around with you. Oh man, I'd have it stuck up under my armpit or something. Make sure I didn't lose.
I don't know that I would be carrying that kind of money around in a brown paper bag, but that's just me. So I'm just saying.
No, think about it though. I'm glad you said that, because think about it. Who would be doing that? Think about it. In what business, legitimate business, would you be carrying money around? First of all, would you be carrying that much, especially today? Now,
right.
A little different back then, but today to be carrying, very few people have cash, credit cards and checks, but with credit cards, a lot of people don't have much cash on them anymore. But it certainly would be dangerous if you did. And there's all kinds of ways. If you go to the bank and take out $15,000 in cash, there's no way that you can know for sure that you weren't observed somewhere along the way, that it was noticed. Oh, you talk about risk. And then to put it in a paper bag. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's some fun stuff.
So we're going to look at a few things here. We're going to look at Garvin and, well, actually all of you guys leaving Southeastern, but Garvin leaves with the Southeastern title, which was Ron Fuller's top belt in his company. Garvin wins it back from Alexis Smirnoff the last night you guys perform, or at least one of the last nights in the company. He leaves the promotion with the title belt in hand, but he also leaves with the boat in hand, which he had basically gotten the money loaned to him from Ron Fuller. We're going to get into that and where that money actually came from in that brown paper bag. I'm not quite sure, but we're going to get going, and I'm going to read some of the early excerpts here as Alex begins in the book talking about Ronnie Garvin taking the Southeastern title with him, which did not belong to him. But now, unless you want to let everyone know out there that wrestling is a work, obviously Garvin has to lose the title to give it up. So it's his. He owns it right now, at least from a kayfabe standpoint. So the story goes, Garvin had become the Southeastern champion the night before he and his cohorts left the promotion. But rather than leaving the belt behind, Garvin took the belt with him. What's more, according to Ron Fuller, Garvin took a bunch of Fuller's money with him when he left. According to Fuller, Garvin had wanted to buy a new boat. Ron Garvin already owned a boat, but was in the market for a new one. So Ron Garvin, that is, came up with the idea for an angle in which Southeastern Championship Wrestling would hold a Bayliner boat tournament. The idea was that Southeastern would announce that it had purchased a brand new Bayliner boat and that the winner of the tournament would win said boat. Not surprisingly, Garvin's plan called for Ronnie Garvin to win the tournament. Makes sense. And while the boat was advertised on TV as having been bought by Southeastern, in reality, the plan was for Ron Fuller to loan Garvin $12,000, not $15,000 like some have reported, $12,000 cash on behalf of Southeastern Wrestling. Now, I did some math here, and in today's world, 2024 money, Ron Fuller was walking around with a paper bag full of $52,000 in today's money. My God, think about that, Bob.
Oh, man, it's unbelievable. I mean, just incomprehensible, People are scared to walk around with regular checks. They want cashier's checks, much less cash. Oh my God. Well, let's continue down that path because we'll soon see why.
Yes.
I'm curious if Ronnie traded in his
old boat,
the boat he had.
Well, that's next right here in the excerpts. So
okay.
That was an excellent question, Bob. I'm so glad you asked that because I guess the plan supposedly was for Ronnie Garvin to take this $12,000 cash in '79 money, by the way, and make it as a down payment on a brand new boat. Garvin would then use the loan from Fuller to buy the new boat and sell his other boat and use that as proceeds to start beginning to repay Ron Fuller with an 8% interest involved because, well, we don't do anything for free in wrestling, do we, Bob?
Oh, we don't.
So in reality, Garvin would win the tournament, but not actually, quote unquote, win the boat. Fuller withdrew the $12,000 from the bank. Now that's what it says here. I want to get into that later again. He placed it in a brown paper bag and gave it to Ronnie Garvin. No receipt, by the way, guys. According to Fuller, Garvin then went ahead and bought the boat. He left the company before the conclusion of the tournament and left Fuller holding the bag. I wrote an empty bag, no doubt. Despite Fuller's request, Garvin never repaid. Thank you. Never repaid Fuller for the loan. So Fuller sued Garvin in Chancery Court in Knoxville. And so it begins, Bob.
I'm thinking back all those years. I'm just flashing. We covered this in an earlier episode where Ronnie was the one that said, let's take it, about taking over the territory.
Yeah.
I know that when Ronnie was saying that, he knew that if we did that,
yeah, he could write off
he didn't have to pay Fuller back.
That's
he
right.
He was going to make $12,000 minus whatever payments he'd made. He was going to make that right off the get-go because he wasn't going to have to pay Fuller back. There were no records of any kind.
No, none at all, as we'll find out, which just completely boggles my mind for a businessman like Ron Fuller, who had been a promoter for long enough and been in the wrestling business long enough to know to cross his T's and dot his I's. I don't know, man, but we're going to continue on here. It says that Fuller maintained kayfabe in his initial complaint. Ron Fuller's initial complaint did not identify Fuller or Garvin as wrestlers, and he did that on purpose when he filed with the court initially. And it said nothing about a Bayliner boat tournament. Instead, Fuller simply stated that he had loaned Ronnie Garvin $12,000 and had not been paid back. He sought to recover the $12,000 he had loaned Garvin and asked the court to issue a writ of attachment, commanding the local sheriff to attach the 27-foot Bayliner boat and trailer, basically go dock it, and so that Ronnie Garvin would not have control of the boat during the lawsuit. And that's what happens, at least initially here. However, Ron Fuller somehow manages to have control of the boat during that period, and he will actually take the boat down to the arena, at least on one instance, and show it off as the tournament continues on. Though Ron Fuller has no rights to the boat, he's still advertising it, and that comes into play later as well.
Oh, I never heard of that part of it. I never knew that he got the boat back.
Yeah, so apparently he didn't necessarily have the rights to the boat. He couldn't really go utilize the boat, but somehow people still speculate how he pulled it off. But because Ronnie Garvin didn't have the rights to the boat during the court hearings, so it was Ron Fuller able to take the boat and show it off, showcase it as part of his tournament, even though he knew he was in the middle of suing Ronnie Garvin for the money for this boat. So lots of shenanigans going on already, guys. Things that nobody have ever really talked about outside of doing this deep dive here in this book. So the story goes on. It says less than 2 weeks after Fuller filed suit, Garvin's cohorts, that's you guys, who had left Southeastern with him, wrote a letter to the editor of the Knoxville News Sentinel, we talked about that, in which they broke kayfabe by referring to Fuller as the promoter of the organization, noting that the Tennessee Athletic Commission prohibits one from being both a promoter and a participant in a wrestling exhibition. So you guys outed Ron Fuller as the owner of his company, Ron Welch, of course. And so basically the law, at least in Tennessee, states you can't run a promotion, promote, and wrestle at the same time.
The law for a long time, didn't he? He was following the laws. It's not like, robbing a bank or something, but, laws and rules are made to be obeyed, to be paid attention to. Well, we We just want to do what's convenient.
Sure. It was convenient for the All-Star group, no doubt about it. It was certainly a shot fired in the direction of Southeastern. Now, whether in response to the letter or as a matter of coincidence in time, Fuller subsequently amended his complaint that he had made against Ron Garvin the next day to include the following language. Plaintiff, that's Ron Welch, Ron Fuller, owns a belt known as the Southeastern Championship belt, which is in the wrongful possession of the defendant, Ron Garvin. The plaintiff has demanded return of his belt, and the defendant has refused and continues to refuse to return the belt to the plaintiff. The defendant is guilty of conversion of the belt and should be ordered by the court to return belt and be responsible for any damages sustained to said property. So, Ron Fuller and the NWA now seeking to recover $12,000 and the championship title.
I'm just all agog about where this is going. I'd love to have been able to have in some way to figure out what the judge was thinking while all this was going on.
Oh man, I can't wait to get to the judge. This is good stuff because we're getting to the good stuff. But I just wanted to set the stage because there's a lot of people out there that may not know this story at all, and for those that do, they may have heard it third, fourth, fifth hand online to where the story changes by every passing telling of it, and so. This is basically the factual version of the story, so I want to get it all out there and get your opinion in between as we build to the actual court hearing here.
It's interesting in a way. I still can't quite figure out why I have all the heat. I
was asking myself that the entire time I was reading this, Bob.
I haven't seen Ron Fuller or Welch. I haven't seen him since the last day I worked down there. I mean, all those years ago. I have not laid eyes on it. And I've seen Robert, his brother, but I haven't seen Ron. And so here's Ron. He's in court. He and Ronnie Garvin both had to be in court for this lawsuit.
Yes.
And he's seen Ronnie a bunch of times. He and Ronnie, to my understanding, Ron Fuller and Ronnie Garvin are not buddies, but they've
made amends.
They're on speaking terms now.
Yes.
Ronnie Garvin screwed him, like
6 ways from Sunday.
Yeah. More than I did. My God.
I was scratching my head as I was doing the research myself. So I am totally on board with that. So we fast forward, the trial finally taking place February 13th, 1980 in the Knox County Chancery Court before Chancellor Frederick D. McDonald. And as it played out, Fuller was willing to do what he and his lawyer thought was necessary to win the case, including exposing the true nature of the Bayliner boat tournament. Now, after announcing that he had thought that this would be a rather quick lawsuit, Fuller's attorney asked Ron Fuller about the Bayliner boat tournament. Within the first minute or two of the trial, Fuller explained Garvin's idea behind the tournament and that Garvin needed a loan in order to make a down payment on the boat. Fuller's lawyer then had Fuller elaborate on the details of the tournament. This is actual transcript I'm about to read right now from the court case in the hearing. The question from the attorney: was it predetermined who was going to win the tournament? Ron Fuller's reply: yes. Question next is, who was that going to be? Ron Fuller replies, Ron Garvin. Now on cross-examination, Garvin's attorney asked Fuller about the details of the loan. Did he insist on a date of repayment? No. Did he have any receipts showing the withdrawal of the money that he gave to Garvin? No, don't have that either. Did he ask for any kind of security interest to verify his interest in the boat? Nope. So Garvin's attorney focused most heavily on Fuller's admission that the result of the Bayliner boat tournament had been predetermined. So before I get your take on this, Bob, for years, the story has been that the reason Ron Fuller lost this lawsuit, I know you got a different version, but the reason out there by most, and I don't know who put it out there, it sounds like from the Fuller camp, but I'm not positive on that. Somebody told the story at some point that the reason Ron Fuller lost this court case was because he refused to break kayfabe for the dignity of professional wrestling. And as you can see, a minute or two into the case, the very first question he is asked is, was this tournament rigged? Absolutely. And who was going to quote unquote win the tournament? Ronnie Garvin. So for those of you who thought Ron Fuller was going to work along with the kayfabe, not so much here when $52,000 in today's money is at stake.
Was this trial held in Knoxville?
Yes, Knox County. Chancellor's Court.
Wow. How long after we split off did this court case come up?
Well, I don't know when the lawsuit was filed. You guys left in June of 79. This court hearing begins in February of 1980, which is pretty fast for court.
Was Fuller still running a promotion?
I believe he folded right at the end of 79. Okay.
Because if he was, I'm glad to hear he wasn't, because if he was, to admit that yeah, no wonder he not just killed. After he went out of business, I still don't know why. He killed it dead for everybody by that exposing that, yeah, stuff's all predetermined and all that. You're talking to one of the biggest stars in that territory, at least during that era, that when he came in there, he was the first big star babyface, wasn't he? And then to expose the business for the whole world, but especially, when you talked about the reason he had to fold was, we talked about it in a previous episode, he had to fold his tent was, I often wondered why, because it seemed like with us gone, the Poffos and our group, we weren't coming down and working in Knoxville anymore. So I was curious why, with us gone, that he couldn't keep promoting.
Well, many have said that it was all of the hot shotting. You guys were running against each other. There was so much wrestling going on, but at the same time, there was the war, right? So you guys were outing him as Ron Welch, and all sorts of things. Lawsuits began. The newspapers were covering it. The TV was covering it to a degree, simply because not only was Southeastern wrestling pretty big in Knoxville, but Ronnie Garvin was just a huge star, and he was clearly involved in this. And so there was just so much going on that the story told anyway, at least my understanding, is a lot of the fans simply turned off their TV sets, disgusted by the fact that they've been watching these larger-than-life wrestlers on TV kicking each other's ass, talking about, I'm going to come down there this Friday night and take care of business. And now they're in court suing each other. And so I think a lot of the people just lost interest overall.
You would not just lose interest, you'd be absolutely horrified at your gullibility. Everybody knows. Everybody's heard that wrestling is fake,
sure,
or predetermined, or whatever. The nice way to put it with McMahon in 1989 was sports entertainment. It's not real competition. It's sports entertainment. But it used to be all wrestling's fake, and that's what we were all fighting about. Or that's what guys were taking on marks and everything else, was to defend the so-called business that it wasn't fake, it wasn't predetermined. And so here you manage to convince people to suspend their disbelief and believe in you, like Ron Fuller being a big star. And, here's a guy who's talked about Andre the Giant, Brewster Brody, come on down to the ring, I'll take you on.
Sure.
Ron Fuller's making this promo, I'll take you on, I'll kick your butt and all that. And now he's in court. He's not suing even a heel. He's doing a babyface.
Right.
Oh, my God. Oh, what an absolute horrible decision. Do
you just count your losses with that kind of money? I don't know that what he did was wrong or right. I mean, I guess it depends on the person and their decision they're making, but it certainly didn't help matters. That's for certain.
Well, I tell you, I'm pretty sure his attorney wasn't free.
No, definitely not. I'm sure he had a nice attorney sitting in there.
And I'm curious that what kind of attorney did he get? Went to court knowing he didn't have a piece of paper. He didn't have a toothpick. He didn't have any evidence at all that he'd given Ron his money. So how did the lawyer, his attorney, convince him that he had a chance to get his money back? It's just unbelievable. I don't know what he must have told.
Reading that cross-examination and just the way he was drilled with those questions of, do you have any proof that you took this money out? Which is kind of weird. That's why I questioned, did he go to the bank to get this money? Wouldn't they constantly have on file a receipt that you would bring to court to prove that you at least took the money out? Whether you gave it to Ronnie Garvin or you made a deal with him is completely not even the point in that instance. It's just, do you even have proof that you took this money out? And the answer here in court was no. And that leads me to believe, where did this money come from? From home? From one of those safes we hear about? I don't know in regards to that, but it's just peculiar.
That's what occurred to me too, as you were saying that story that, and Ron Wright is the one that told me a story. It almost gave me the opinion that Ron Wright had something to do with the story he told about Fuller having a safe in his apartment or wherever he lived, or in somewhere, an office. He had this safe all the shows that he worked, any show that he could work that would let him take out the cash. Some box offices insist on giving you a check because they put the money where it's the safe and secure. If you got $20,000 in cash in your box office, there's people that know that it's dangerous. You get held up. So they would give him a check, but Fuller had an arrangement to be able to take all, like I know he did up in Harlan and Hazard. We talked about
Sure.
The reason we actually got crossways with him, but he was doing cash business up there. So he was taking all his cash home and putting it in a safe. And the story I heard was that he had a safe that was capable. I guess a couple of people could pick it up and carry it out of there.
Mm-hmm.
So what he might have done, he might have invested a bigger and better safe, one that.
Yeah, like one called a bank.
Yeah. But see, if your money's in the bank, there's a record of it.
Yeah.
There's a record of it. When I deposited money for Ole Anderson, if I had $40,000 in gate receipts from a show, which I did this one time, I had $40,000 in cash. And was I nervous in my motel room. But the next day I took it and I deposited it in 4 different banks and got cashier's checks for it for about $9,500 because they have to report anything over $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
And but Fuller, I think, kept as much cash as he could. That way he didn't have to report it. He didn't have to pay taxes on it. So, I mean, I'm not saying that's what he did, but it really sounds like that's what he did.
Yeah, I'm not 100% on that either, but they continue on asking him questions. And this is Ron Garvin's attorney as well. He asks Ron in regards to the boat and the way they were selling it on their local television programming. He said, I believe that you used the boat in an advertisement for Southeastern Wrestling. Is that correct? Fuller responds, yes. And that advertisement stated that Southeastern had bought the boat and they were going to give it to the winner of the tournament. And that was an elimination tournament. Is that correct? Fuller replies, right. I'm familiar with the way the matches are actually won, says the attorney, basically saying that I'm aware they're rigged. But the general principle was that Southeastern had a boat, and whoever won that boat was going to get from Southeastern the championship for winning the boat. Is that right? They're going to be crowned the winner of the tournament. They're going to receive the boat. Is that right? Ron Fuller says, right. And that wasn't actually really what happened. And Ron Fuller says, actually, we did not buy the entire boat for Southeastern Wrestling. So he's trying to work around this here in the courts. Actually, it was predetermined, asked the attorney, who was going to win the boat. Didn't we already state that? Yes, says Ron Fuller. And therefore, the advertisement in this entire transaction of Southeastern Wrestling owning the boat and giving it to a wrestler was actually a fraud to the public. Wasn't it, Ron Fuller? And Ron's response was, well, to a certain extent. And of course, his attorney, you asked what he's making that money for sitting over there. Fuller's attorney objects to that, Bob.
It just created a distraction. But yeah, that was fraud. Wrestling is fraud right up front. Where you say, oh yeah, this is all real. Yeah. Oh man, that's just, I can't believe he went to court. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's a funny question. So basically this tournament, this winning the boat thing, it's a fraud. And Ron Fuller replies, to a certain extent. So I love that response there. He's doing his best not to completely expose the business, even though he has already completely exposed the business.
Not to expose the business, to confess to a crime.
Well,
fraud is a crime. Well, it was only a little fraud. It wasn't big fraud. It was just a little fraud.
It was wrestling fraud.
I'm going to give you just a little sentence then. Instead of 50 years, I'm only going to give you 5. Yeah. Man, oh man. Well, to some extent. Well, did you murder this person or not? Well, to some extent I did. But, oh man.
So after referring to it as a fraud, after having Fuller's attorney object, Garvin's attorney rephrases it. He says, let me rephrase this. Isn't it a fact that the public was being told this was a tournament and there was going to be a winner? Correct, says Ron Fuller. And that winner was going to get the boat from Southeastern. Correct, says Ron Fuller, but it had already been predetermined who was going to win that tournament. Wasn't it, Mr. Fuller? Yes, says Ron Fuller. So Garvin's lawyer later focusing, as the transcript goes on here, on the details of the departure of Garvin and the rest of you guys from Southeastern and how that departure related to the boat. So Ron Garvin's attorney goes on. He says, now, after they had withdrawn and after Mr. Garvin had used his boat and after this lawsuit was filed and an attachment was issued for this boat, Mr. Fuller, you continued to use this boat in your advertising. Did you not? And Fuller replies, yes. And in fact, you continue to run the tournament involving the boat. Did you not? Ron Fuller replies, yes. So I got to ask you, Bob, if I'm in the middle of a lawsuit trying to get money back for a boat that I don't own, why am I promoting a boat that I don't own on my show?
Oh man, I still am bewildered about why I went to court. By the way, a little aside, I'm not sure who Ronnie Garvin's attorney was, but we had an incident once, and this story comes back to this attorney. We had an incident one time. My wife Molly and I, we weren't married yet, but her and I and Buddy Landell went out to a club in Knoxville. We went out dancing. I remember it was a gay club. I mean, it was for gay patrons, men and women. And what was really nice was you could go in there and nobody cared about you being a celebrity. You know, you weren't a celebrity then. Everybody was minding their own business. Nobody was going to give any crap. So we could go in there and dance and, you know, and just be anonymous. But when we were leaving, my girlfriend Molly was driving, and they had this road right near the club had some cones on it. And she went around the cone, and this cop stopped us, and I had to believe he was waiting for us because he arrested her, and it wasn't for being drunk or anything. He called it reckless driving. Well, she wasn't going more than about 15 miles an hour, and the cops didn't like. I don't want to say I had good heat. I mean, I did have serious heat there, and Bobby and I both did. And so the cops didn't like us. They saw us having a lot of fun and, you know, having like a life of Riley. And there's just a couple of them. There's just a couple guys that were laying for us that pulled us over several times looking for something, some kind of excuse to run us in. What they did, they couldn't get me, but they put my poor girlfriend in jail, and she had to spend the night in jail, and this was like 2:00 in the morning. Well, I went and I knew Ronnie knew an attorney, and I got hold of Ronnie right away, and he called the guy that night, and the next morning we went to court. All he did was walk up to they brought Molly in, and he walked up to the judge and just said a couple words. The judge just said dismissed. You never even heard from any kind of prosecutor about any crime that she committed. So that tells me that we're just it was basically harassment. But the point is, this attorney was really sharp. He was, he had presence, you know. I mean, he wasn't to my knowledge, he wasn't a flim-flam man. He just seemed really, really solid. The reason I'm telling that is because when you talk about Ronnie's attorney questioning Fuller, if it's this guy, I could see him just chewing to a new one, you know, because he was a sharp cookie. So I want to throw that in there.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that because as I read the excerpts here, they really read like a very intelligent attorney, almost like a television program attorney where they almost know what's coming next. So they're already prepared for their next comment. He immediately rephrased things after calling wrestling a fraud or the results of the tournament a fraud. He just simply rephrased it basically immediately to counteract the way Ron Fuller's attorney had thrown in the objection there. So it's very interesting. And there's one more question here before we move on, asked by the attorney to Ron Fuller. It says, so after the boat was under attachment for this court, and by under attachment, that means nobody technically, I guess you would say, owned it per se. At least nobody could really utilize the boat at this point in time because the question of who owned it was basically being taken place here in this court right now, being decided right now. So while it was under attachment and docked, Ron Fuller continued to use the boat. In fact, one time he had it down at the Civic Coliseum for one of the occasions of the tournament during some of the elimination matches. And he's asked about that here, if he had the boat down there after it was attached. Fuller's reply is, I had it down there once. I'm not sure it was after that time, but it was there on one occasion. And so you have to remember, prior to the boat being attached, it was in Ron Garvin's possession. Garvin was living on the boat. So for it to be down at the Civic Coliseum, you have to know that Ron Fuller had possession of it, or at least was able to gain possession of it. But he says here in the court, I did have it down there once, but I couldn't tell you if it was before or after this lawsuit.
Did he go any further with that? Because if he had it down there after it had been attached, it didn't belong to him either, did it?
I don't know how that works, but again, I've heard people state that they're not really sure how Ron Fuller came into possession of using the boat during that period. So I don't really know how that worked out, but I would have to imagine it was during that time period because, again, before that, Ronnie Garvin was living on the boat. I don't think they hoisted it up and dragged it off to the Civic Coliseum while Ron Garvin was sleeping, although that would have made for a fun movie plot or something along those lines. But
yeah. Yeah.
So we're going to move away from the boat and the 12 grand just for a moment. And we're going to go back to the Southeastern title. And then we're going to come back to the judge's decision and everything and all the fallout and everything at the end of this. But right now we're going to go over to the Southeastern title portion of this lawsuit. The parties also focus some attention on the Southeastern Heavyweight Championship belt, which at this point was in Ron Garvin's possession. Ron Fuller's complaint charged Garvin with the offense of conversion, which involves the wrongful exercise of control over a property of another, basically theft. By keeping the belt, Garvin was clearly exercising control of the belt and treating it as his own. Thus, the key legal questions should have been, was the belt the property of Fuller in Southeastern Wrestling? And if so, did Garvin nonetheless have the legal right to retain possession? Regarding the first question, Fuller testified that he, the sole shareholder of Southeastern Championship Wrestling, had paid for the actual belt. Under the law, a bailer, which is Ron Fuller in this case, has the right to demand the return of his property from the bailee, being Ron Garvin, at any time. Thus, as the bailee, Garvin should have been legally obligated to return the belt to Fuller once Fuller demanded it. The failure to do so amounts to an unlawful conversion. Basically, Ron Garvin has no rights to the title belt. Now, that's going to be funny when we see the judge's decision here at the end. But at this point in time, the argument is that, hey, Ron Fuller bought this belt. It's his.
Again, I guess it's fortunate for Fuller he had already folded up his tent in Knoxville because, wow, I'm surprised they were able to run wrestling in there again. I know Cornette and some other people went up there later and tried to run in that area. Mm-hmm. But it seemed like that kind of this thing, the whole deal, was such a stink in wrestling fans, in their thoughts, their mind, their mouth, whatever. Such a horrible taste in their mouth of this kind of, and not just that, all the machinations and the behind. Now you're behind the Wizard. You've seen the Wizard of Oz. There's just this little strap. The curtain has been pulled, and you get to see what's behind it. And you got all these petty machinations, arguing, going to court about a belt. Oh yeah, I mean, wrestling fans assume that all wrestlers are wealthy. The guys usually have decent cars. They look good on TV. A lot of them wear jewelry, and they always profess to be making millions of dollars, or not millions.
Perception is reality. Yeah,
exactly. And that everybody's wealthy. And so now it comes down to here where he's going to court for $12,000. That's like tip money, for Andre the Giant. Yeah, it's what an expose. Just absolute mind-boggling.
Now, we do have to remember, as Ron Fuller closes up shop here in Knoxville, he basically sells the territory to Jim Barnett, who basically floats it over to Ric Flair and Blackjack Mulligan, who give it a try here in the early 80s and doesn't really work out too well, but they do get to borrow some talent from Crockett and whatnot because they were working there at the same time. So they continue to try to revive Knoxville. It doesn't work. Ron Fuller is actually going to come back to Knoxville much later in the 1980s. Doesn't last too long. And then, as you said, Jim Cornette going to spend the better part of, say, 4 or 4.5 years working the Knoxville territory in the early to mid 1990s, closing up shop just after Thanksgiving of 95, if I remember correctly. So this won't be the last time somebody tries to run the Knoxville territory, but it wasn't just about taking the title belt. There was a little more, because according to the allegations made by Fuller in a separate lawsuit that he had filed back in October of 79 against your company, All Star Wrestling, Fuller stated that you guys continued to advertise Garvin as the Southeastern champion. Hey, possession is 9/10 of the law, guys, despite the fact that he was no longer working for the Southeastern company. So according to Fuller, not only was Garvin in wrongful possession of the physical belt, he and, of course, All Star Wrestling were trading on his Southeastern name. This was a separate lawsuit he had filed against your company, All Star Wrestling, in regards to billing someone there as his Southeastern champion. And of course, I believe that was the same lawsuit that he filed where he put in a restraining order against you guys attending his events. So Ron Fuller all up in the courthouse right now, filing every lawsuit he can come up with against all of you guys. And of course, these are making the local papers in Knoxville. And you wonder why business was down and people were becoming disillusioned with wrestling as a whole in the Knoxville territory at this point in time. Here's this big, bad, top of the line wrestler, top level talent, Ron Fuller. And now we learn he's the promoter as well. And he's just filing lawsuits left and right on his wrestlers or his former wrestlers because he just has all these issues he can't handle in the ring.
And he's also getting a restraining order. You know, women who have violent husbands get restraining orders to keep their husbands at least 90 feet away so they can't beat the crap out of them. Was a 6'9", 250-pound wrestler getting a restraining order? Oh, those other wrestlers might come down. You know, especially in a business where you have wrestlers running in the ring all the time. Every show has at least one run in, maybe half a dozen, where people run in and usually attack a babyface. That goes on a regular basis. So now he's got a restraining order to make sure none of those other wrestlers can come and run in the ring. It's just ridiculous. I mean,
I think some of that, at least the claim, if I remember correctly, when I was reading in regards to that restraining order deal, was you guys causing a ruckus in the crowd and basically promoting yourselves, and it was hurting his business. I don't know if he was really worried so much about anybody jumping the railing, so to speak, and attacking anyone. It was detrimental to his company, basically having you guys in there. He didn't know what you were capable of doing.
I think it was more of the former. I think he was worried for his own butt.
Okay.
This is just, I'm putting all the facts I have available to me.
Sure.
The show I went to, I walked in there, and I sat, I was not at ringside. I was the first row behind ringside, and I wasn't even in the first row. I was like third row back. So, I could have run in there. But the whole time I was there, nobody approached me. No fans, not one, came up to me and said, "What are you doing here?" or whatever. People just basically ignored me. Not one of the wrestlers that came out and worked in the ring, not one of them looked in my direction. So I don't know, what was I going to do? Get up and start throwing chairs or something? In hindsight, I've looked back on once you and I started, open up this, I don't know if I want to call it a can of worms. Once you and I opened up this brown paper bag of information.
See what you did there?
Yeah. I started thinking, I could have snuck in the building somehow and run in the ring, with Fuller in there or Slater. And how's anybody going to know? The cops would have been told. I'm sure they told them because they wouldn't let me in the back. I'm sure I went to them and said, "Don't let these guys in." I'm convinced, again, he'd already had it happen to him in Sydney, Australia, where he was absolutely humiliated. Ring, 7-8 minutes with a guy 7-8 inches shorter than him. The kid gets out of the ring, runs up the aisle, waving his hand. Fuller's there with his hair messed up, elbow bleeding, knee bleeding, huffing and puffing, and frustrated and just looking at. He was watching the kid leave the ring and head it back down the aisle. He was also watching his career in Sydney, Australia, go down the aisle with him because he was dead after that. So you can't tell me a guy wouldn't remember that. That's got to be one of the most traumatic things that can happen to you. It's where you get exposed for not really being that tough. In fact, you aren't tough at all because a kid, much smaller than you kicks your butt. So with Ron Fuller having that in his history and his background, I think the worst thing could happen, what really would have killed his business, was if I had run in the ring, or Bobby, or Ronnie, even Larry Simon. Larry was a tough guy. But if we had run in the ring and knocked him out, or took him down, or broke his leg, or whatever, how are you going to charge us? How could you bring charges? I'm sure they would try. I think that I'm doing a what if possibility.
Sure, there's lots of things that could have happened, and that really goes back to explaining why there's a restraining order in place. I see where you're going with that.
scared to death. How are you going to tell who's legally here and who isn't?
Right. It's professional wrestling. Nobody knows what the work is. Exactly. Yeah. And it goes back to the lawsuit. If there was one impending there, hey, he came into my company and attacked, but I see that all the time on TV. So what makes this any different? Yeah. So yeah, it's, I get it. It's a double-edged sword. Certainly kayfabe.
You could go back into court if they got charged. You could go back into court and say, Your Honor, I kind of let go, kind of run out by Mr. Fuller, and I was trying to get my job back. That's why I ran in the ring. I didn't kill him. All I did was knock him out, but I was trying to get my job back. And maybe you could get away with it. It might be one of those things where a judge would hold it up and say, and my attorney, if it had been the same one Ronnie had, would have had tapes of about 50 run-ins, including Ron Fuller running in the ring. You show as evidence that what I did wasn't so. The attorney said, well, what's the difference between this wrestler running in and, well, this guy didn't work for our company. Well, so what? He's a wrestler. So anyway,
you could point to anything if we're kayfabing the court system here. You could come in and say, well, what about, and I'm just using a made-up story here, but you can say, what about this guy over here? There was this guy, Dennis Condrey. He lost a Loser Leaves Town match. He came back under a mask. They never even bothered to check under the mask. So I just assumed I was permitted to come back anytime I wanted to. Yeah, it's so dangerous, the wrestling world. So, until they finally opened it up in court in the 80s. I mean, people knew before then, but until Vince McMahon went in there in court and legally testified that, yes, wrestling's a work, et cetera, until the courts agreed to accept that, there were things like this happening. And that's how kind of it plays a little bit into how Ronnie Garvin's going to win this court case. Spoiler alert, guys.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com, and to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia podcast network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
But we're going to go on because now we're going to talk about Ronnie Garvin accusing Ron Fuller of having unclean hands. And there's a jokes in there, I'm sure, guys. But unclean hands was actually a term used in courts. It's no longer a thing, I don't believe, anymore. But we're going to talk about that right now. So usually once a plaintiff, Ron Fuller in this case, presents their case, the defendant gets a chance to introduce their own evidence. But in this instance, Garvin's lawyer made a motion to dismiss the entire case without even introducing any evidence, because Garvin's lawyer argued that the case should be dismissed on the equitable doctrine of unclean hands. Now, what does that mean, Ray? A lot of people are asking. Well, the ancient principle is founded on the idea that, as expressed by a New Jersey court way back, Bob, in 1793, you were just a little baby back then, I think. So it says, those who come into a court of justice must come in with clean hands. The United States Supreme Court has explained that whenever a party who, as an actor, seeks to set the judicial machinery in motion, basically form a lawsuit, and obtain some remedy, has violated conscience or good faith or other equitable principle in his prior conduct, then the doors of the court will be shut against him. So basically, the court will refuse to interfere on his behalf to acknowledge his right or to award him any remedy. In short form, guys, a court will not help a party when the party comes to the court with unclean hands concerning the matter in question. Aha.
Right. Yeah, well, geez, I probably didn't take the judge long to figure that one out.
No.
It's like, well, do you have any receipts? No. Any kind of paper at all? Was there even any writing on the paper bag? I mean,
yeah, and it even goes back to the fact that they were frauding the fans by stating that the winner of a tournament was getting the belt when they, that simply wasn't the truth. So there's a lot of uncleanliness going on here.
Well, the amount in question was $12,000.
Correct.
I'm just curious what the attorney's fees would have been. Even then, I had to get attorneys a few times. I mean, just to answer a simple misdemeanor complaint would cost me $500.
Sure.
Just to go to court, and my attorney stand up and say, Your Honor, is absolutely frivolous. Only there about 2 minutes. The judge say dismissed. Cost me $500 for the attorney. I had this person in Atlanta when I was working for Ole, kept bringing these charges. Actually charged me all the way up to a prosecuting attorney, and then I got dismissed. They went all the way back down to the bottom and got me they went to what's it called? It's below a judge.
Magistrate? I don't know how that.
Magistrate. They went to a magistrate. They went to a magistrate and brought charges against me. So I had to go 3 times. It cost me $500 every time. And my attorney apologized. He said, I'm sorry. He said, but it's just a going rate because same thing. Every time the judge dismissed it within like 15 seconds. But you have to pay those attorneys. So I was just curious what it must have cost to do a court case.
Now that information is not in here, so I can't say. But I'm sure that maybe that was the next person Ron Fuller sued was his attorney. I don't know. But according to Garvin's lawyer, According to Garvin's lawyer, the entire transaction involving the boat was full of deceit, and that Ron Fuller had come to the court seeking help with unclean hands. The public, by own admission of the plaintiff's agent, was going to be told that this boat had been purchased by Southeastern Wrestling. The public was going to be told that this was a tournament. It was being advertised as a tournament, when in actuality, even taking the plaintiff's testimony, it was predetermined from the very beginning who was going to win the boat. So the transaction is in deceit from its very beginning, Bob. The person seeking equity and seeking recovery in this court of equity has unclean hands. So that's the argument. Again, I don't believe this is a thing anymore. And I think this is one of the last times it was able to be used in a professional wrestling lawsuit, by the way, too, on record anyway. But it's just kind of funny that was available to use, and this attorney knew it.
They might call it conflict of interest now, something like that. But yeah, the idea, but I want to go back to Fuller's lawyer again.
Mm-hmm.
What was he thinking? To go into court, to defend, to try to make a case.
I don't think that he had walked into a professional wrestling court case before. Again, we go back to the very beginning of the story. His attorney, Ron Fuller's attorney, thought this was going to be quick and over with. It was simple. And on paper, it is simple. I loaned you $12,000. I want my $12,000 back. Plain and simple. Okay, now on paper, that makes sense. But now we're in a court of law. And now you got to prove a whole lot of things. And then you got this pro wrestling shenanigans lumped into it, and that makes it a whole another ball of wax. And that's why when Ron Fuller initially filed this lawsuit, he left out the boat. He left out professional wrestling. It was just, I loaned this guy money, I wanted money back, but he realized eventually he had to incorporate all of this, the rest of this in here. But even Ron Fuller realized on the beginning of things that let's just make it about the money and not involve wrestling. But, you know, at this point, it's you can't really ignore it.
Man, oh man. I don't know I don't know how much you'd have to pay me to get sit on be in court and testify and admit that I'm a phony, or that I've been not a phony, but I put forward myself as this sterling athlete, champion for good and what's right, and it turns out I was just behind the scene, just trying to make money and convince people that I'm real. I don't know. It seems to me that Fuller must have felt humiliated. I don't know how he couldn't.
So the story goes on here, and even though Garvin's defense in regarding his claim to be the owner of the Southeastern title belt was fairly weak, the argument concerning ownership of the boat, the money, and of course the unclean hands was a strong one. In fact, it states that Fuller's lawyer was caught off guard. Boy, you're telling me. So he responded by arguing that the unclean hands doctrine should not apply. But if it did apply, it applied with equal force to Ronnie Garvin. After all, the lawyer argued the boat tournament was Garvin's idea to begin with. He needed the money to get a boat, and he used the idea of a fictitious tournament to get said boat. Now, ultimately, guys, the Chancellor McDonald agreed with both parties. The court observed that the unclean hands argument raised a question of public policy. Should the courts of Tennessee be used as a means of enforcing contracts to carry out fixed wrestling matches? Viewed in that light, the answer to the question certainly must be apparent. We don't think that the court should have any part of enforcing for the plaintiff or the defendant, for that matter, this type of contract. The public would lose all confidence in the courts if they became a part of the transaction and this wrestling circus that's involved in it, I might add. So instead, the Chancellor McDonald wisely concluded that the appropriate solution was to leave the parties in exactly where they were when they came into the court. The court dismissed Ron Fuller's complaint and resolved the attachment, giving Ronnie Garvin back his boat. The court observed that normally where there had been a wrongful attachment, the victim would have the right to recover for any losses. So Ronnie Garvin, had he not been also found with unclean hands here, he would have actually been able to countersue Ron Fuller for the money that he could have charged him for having his boat attached and not being able to live in it. So Ron Fuller almost double screwed himself here if it wasn't for his attorney coming in at the back end and saying, hey, well, if we have unclean hands, so does Ronnie Garvin. And the judge agrees to that. So had he not agreed to that, Ronnie Garvin would have been able to sue Ron Fuller on top of all this for the money lost in damages, basically for losing his boat for X amount of days or weeks.
Wow. Oh, man. Well, you talk about penny wise, dollar foolish. Oh, man. Going into court and you're getting a wash, you have to pay your attorney. You lose, I'm surprised he ever went back to Knoxville to show his face back there in a wrestling ring after testifying in court that he was, I don't want to say a phony, but that it wasn't for real. Nothing he did out there was ever real, and then go in and try to do an interview talking about he's a pro wrestler and all that, how tough he is. Just absolutely ridiculous. What a debacle. I'm curious about something else. I know Ronnie Garvin and I, until about 3 presidential elections ago, had been real close. I would go down and see him every year, spend a week or two at his place in West Virginia. He had a place up on a mountain there, and I'd spend a week with him. And, we liked each other, got along real well. And Ronnie's a sharp guy, and he's he's not formally educated, but he's street smart and he's intelligent. I wouldn't be surprised if he planned this whole thing. Went to Fuller with the idea, not that he was planning on going opposition,
right?
But
that certainly helped, though, right? Because now I can have my cake and eat it too if this works out.
Yeah, but once he was in it, when I came back to him that time after meeting with Fuller a second time about the money, about being screwed on the payouts, and went back and said, well, I'm just going to give my notice and leave. And Ronnie said, well, why don't we take it? That could have been what he was thinking about. That might have been worth the equivalent of vital. I don't know what other way that he had his hand in Ron Fuller's pocket. Not that he was a thief, but, because Ronnie was producing in the ring. Ronnie Garvin made Ron Fuller a lot more money than Ron Fuller made.
You could argue that Ronnie Garvin had that $12,000 coming to him.
Oh, big time. If it was worth like $20,000, say, all told, I don't know what else he might have had not his hooks, but had, Fuller trusted him. And what's is not surprising to me, because Ronnie's been in the wrestling business since he was 15 years old. We're the same age, but by the time I broke in, he had 11 years of experience when I broke in. So, he was always a veteran, even though we're the same age. And I wouldn't be surprised. A lot of the stories he told me, he was around some of the master manipulators in the whole country.
Certainly.
And he and Terry, partners with Terry Garvin. Mm-hmm. Oh, some of the things those guys did, and the way, the angles they figured and the swerves they pulled, the con jobs they pulled on people, just amusing themselves sometimes, were so really sharp. And I wouldn't be surprised that Ronnie Garvin has managed to work his way back into Ron Fuller's, I don't want to say good graces, but at least speaking terms. Yeah. After all that, you would think that after all that, after being humiliated in court and being out $20,000 or whatever, at least 12, you would think that would be something, and not just that, being humiliated. You would think that Ron Fuller would say, well, I've got no use for Ronnie Garvin ever again. But Ronnie has a way of coming across and being kind of shucks and not apologetic, but to where, he's a very likable guy. The fact that he's on good terms, or at least speaking terms with Ron Fuller now, it's still, in light of what you just told me, and anybody out there listening, think about what you've heard about what Ronnie Garvin did to Ron Fuller, and the fact that they're on speaking terms today, because Ronnie's never paid him back. I'm pretty sure Ronnie Garvin's never paid Fuller back. And yet, if I had somebody screwed me out of $1,000, $100, and I have to see him and I can't get my money back, I'm not going to be real friendly with him. I mean, I'm not going to spit on him or smack him, but I'm going to avoid him probably. I don't want to see the jerk. But Ronnie's just this great worker, and at time, I'll give you a little short story. Ronnie told me, he said, he had all these great philosophies about, he said, say some guy's messing around with your wife, he's screwing around with your wife, and you catch him or whatever. He said, don't kill the guy. He said, don't beat him up, because you're going to go to jail. He said, what you do is you wait. He said, You wait a year, you wait 2, 6, 3. Maybe the guy has a heart attack. Maybe his wife leaves him, whatever. But, he says, and then after 5 years, if nothing's happened to him, he said, then you run him over with your car. and I thought about it, and it just makes really good sense, because if you do it right after the insult, it's obvious that, who was mad at this guy? Well, Ronnie Garvin was mad at him. But 5 years later, it could have been anybody. So it was really, he said it, he laughed. He said, yeah, then you run him over. But he was serious, because Ronnie had a hot temper. When he got hot, he would do stuff like that. Run people out of things.
Yeah, no, I've heard some stories in regards to Ron Garvin. When you hear the list of people you didn't mess with, he was definitely near the top.
Oh, he didn't have to take a baseball bat to you to get you. He figured out some way to get you to screw yourself. And, but, yeah, I'm not a bit surprised that Fuller is got his back in his, I don't know if he's good graces, but at least he's talking to him. You would think that I killed Fuller's family, and I not only stole a boat from him, I went and took his boat too and burned both of them.
Yeah.
What are you asking about me?
You look at this, and the funny thing is, I'm sure people are asking, okay, so he didn't get his $12,000 back. He didn't get the boat. But what about the Southeastern title? Well, you have to remember the cleverness of this attorney filing all of this as one lawsuit, Bob, means that the decision is the decision across the board on everything. And that would include the Southeastern title. So even though Ron Fuller owned the rights to it, it's unclean hands involved here. So the judge, or the chancellor, if you will, washes everything out here. And thus that leaves Ronnie Garvin in possession of the Southeastern title, which is technically owned by Ron Fuller. And Garvin would hold on to that belt, eventually selling it on eBay in 2005 for $2,500. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, but I would imagine in today's world, the way wrestling belts and things like that have really picked up in business, I'm talking about old school stuff, that he would have got a lot more for it here in 2024, 2025 coming up. But even in 2005, hey, he held on to that belt and got another $2,500 out of Ron Fuller many years later. So that's what happened to the belt for anybody curious. Garvin got to keep that as well because it was filed in the same lawsuit. So Garvin kept the boat. He kept the money to pay for the boat, and he got to keep the belt for another 25 years before he finally sold it. So that's where we're at in that story. Now,
I should add something.
Absolutely.
Ronnie is very intelligent money-wise. He's frugal. He's not in the bars. He's not doing drugs. He's not buying pot. He's not buying coke. He's saving his money. He's looking to make money wherever he can, and he's saving it and investing it. He buys property, invests in certain things that are safe and whatever. That's why he's one of the success stories in the business. There's so many guys that were big stars in the business that ended up at the end broke and in some cases crippled or at least impaired without any money, and many cases alone. Their family, they were gone all the time when their kids were growing up, so they're not close to them. They end up with nothing, and that's not a success story. That's a failure in terms of life, because wrestling is just a job. It was to me anyway. So, but Ronnie's a success story, and there's not a lot of them. So, and I respect him for that, because it was so easy. For me, it was when a song by Dire Straits came out called Money for Nothing. It wasn't about wrestlers. It was about rock stars. Mm-hmm. But it sounded to me like we could have put wrestlers in there too.
Yeah, many would argue they're very similar in many ways.
Yeah, because I mean, you did have to travel and all that, but you know what? You were sitting in a car, usually a decent car, and you were traveling down the road, and hopefully you had people with you. You were having a few laughs, and on the way back, you were imbibing in whatever chemicals, alcohol, or whatever chemicals you might be interested in doing to kind of come down from the high of, you go in a wrestling ring in front of a crowd. It's hard not to get, not high, but you get tensed up a little bit. It's hard to come down immediately. It takes a little while.
Right.
And a few beers on the way back would always help. And then, marijuana was very common. I think it depended on where you were. If you were in Florida, South Florida was, they were bringing in, a ton of cocaine a week down there during the cocaine high spot of the cocaine drug invasion. And I was in dressing rooms down there where I remember once going into a building where they had these little, it was a Jackie Gleason theater. They had little actors rooms in the dressing room. They had a big room, but they had, like for the stars, they had little one-room dressing rooms just for that one person. And a couple of those, they could lock the door. I got called in a couple times into those by guys who were into coke, wrestlers. And I'm not missing any names, and there'd be sometimes the dealer would be in there. And at one time there was a plate on the table, a full-size dinner plate, and it looked like somebody had taken a cup and put it into a bag of, say, sugar or flour, and then dumped it over on the plate, took the cup away, and then stuck a straw in it. It had to be, I don't know, I don't know how much was in there, but anyway, so yeah, it depended on where you were, but show business has that addition to it of, having chemicals and all sort of extracurricular activities attached to it. But Ronnie was one that he saved his money and, he got out of it with his health. He's done well for himself. So, I'm happy for him.
Yeah, so we come out of the court here. Ronnie Garvin gets to basically keep everything. There is no winner, says the judge, but I beg to differ here. Ronnie Garvin keeps everything. Ron Fuller simply has to pay his attorney fees. But it doesn't end there for Fuller and company, or really anybody involved, because the following day, the Knoxville News-Sentinel reported on the trial at the time, noting Fuller's concession that the results of the Bayliner boat tournament had been predetermined. So there it is in the local newspaper. Wrestling is fixed. In fact, the article was titled Judge Pins Fake Wrestling Scheme. The News-Sentinel accurately reported most of the details concerning Fuller's loan to Ron Garvin. Despite this, the lore surrounding this dispute has always been that Ron Fuller was unwilling to break kayfabe in order to prevail in his lawsuit. Now, in reality, NWA versus Garvin, or Fuller versus Garvin, represents the beginning of the end for the kayfabe era, because prior to this case, active wrestlers have been known, and promoters for that matter, have been known to generally commit perjury, refuse to admit that wrestling was a work in the past. We've seen that. There's plenty of those instances right here in this book I was talking about, by the way, going back in time prior to this period. But here in 1980, Ron Fuller openly admitting in court that wrestling is a work. The tournament was staged. Ronnie Garvin was to quote unquote win the boat because Ronnie Garvin had purchased the boat. And regardless, at the end of the day, by deciding to sue Garvin, Fuller ensured that the truth behind the wrestling business would have to come out in court. In short, kayfabe fought the law that day, and the law won.
Yeah. Yeah, and when I broke in '69, especially in Florida with Eddie Graham, kayfabe was just, it was like 10 commandments or 11th commandment. Thou shalt not expose the business. For Fuller to go into court, and now times have changed, of course, but it's just, I don't know. I'm still, me, I don't take criticism well. I haven't listened to much more of Fuller's rundown, of his derogation of me, because you gave me a lot of relief by saying that most of his stuff had been proven to be untrue or whatever. And the part about he says, well, this could have happened. I don't know if you and I have said that to each other. Maybe, I don't know, I might have said that, speculating about a few things, but it hadn't been something serious about somebody else's behavior, I don't think, or, derogatory to them. Yeah. But, to go in there and humiliate himself, a guy who's made, say, $1 million, and that might be very, very underestimate of what he'd made as a promoter. He had 2 territories working, and I don't know how many years, 2 or 3 years. In Knoxville alone, you could have $15,000 to $25,000 house on Friday and a $10,000 or $8,000 to $10,000 on Saturday, just those 2 days alone, you might have $35,000. Well, multiply that times 52 weeks. Although they didn't run every day, but every week. But you're talking about some serious money to make that kind of money, and then to come back and just expose that the way you made it was fraud. That you basically, fraudulently got that money. You got people to believe in what you were doing, and then to just throw it away over $12,000 compared to like one big house in Knoxville would be $12,000. Fuller would take home $12,000 from it. I mean, free after all expenses were paid, including the talent in some cases. You made $1 million, but you want to get that last $12,000. You can't. I could see if he sued for the belt. If that was the name, that might have been what he should have just stuck with. But what I'm getting at, you probably know, and I'm not trying to be negative here. I know you don't want to have a negative show, and I don't either. But again, I don't take criticism well. And one of the things that I was accused of what I did was that I was greedy. And I don't like that, because that wasn't the case at all. When we went opposition, when we left, that was our last payday that night. In fact, I don't think I got paid, but he just kept the money. So you're going from I was making $1,200-$1,400 a week, to go from that to making nothing, and then going out and trying to start your own promotion. That's greed? I don't think so. I call that ambition. Anyway, onward and upward.
No, yeah, it's a hell of a story, and I love that we were able to kind of go into a book that has full of details, and it's kind of funny because he's a professor of law in Knoxville, and of course, so the first story he tells in his book is this particular story, which took place in Knoxville. Now, you have to remember, Ron Fuller had basically given up the territory by the end of '79, so by the time this goes to court, he's already done. The business has already died down quite a bit in Knoxville to the point where the money wasn't there. And he still had some pretty decent cards from the results I was reading leading into the new year of 1980. Unfortunately, it just wasn't there anymore financially for the Southeastern territory. So it was back down to Alabama, focus all of his interest down there at that point in time. But you guys are still an all-star. You guys are moving over to ICW. And during that run in ICW, Angelo Poffo, I'm assuming it was Angelo, I know it wasn't you, Bob, came up with the idea of this thing called the Sugar Hold Challenge. And I'll let you explain the Sugar Hold in a moment, Bob. But if you have the time, we'll talk a little bit about it this week. And if we have time, we'll talk about the entire story. If not, we'll finish it on the next episode.
Okay.
All right, so I'll let you explain the hold itself in a moment. But basically with the Sugar Hold Challenge, the idea is that they would bring fans in from the audience. We've heard tell of this before in Florida with Eddie Graham and many other places. You talked about it in Australia with Ron Fuller, which really fell flat. But talent had been doing this all over the place. Promoters came up with this idea. I don't really know what the attraction was for this, what they were getting out of this, and I know you're going to elaborate on that in a moment as well. But in this instance, in ICW, Angelo Poffo's company, they promised to pay a fan $1,000 if they could escape Bob Roop's infamous Sugar Hold. And that's a very famous professional wrestling hold that they say you can't really escape. But, basically, I don't know how long this went on for, but they'd call a few fans in before intermission most nights, and they would let them have a try in the ring, have a hand at Bob Roop trying to escape his famous Sugar Hold. And I'll let you explain the hold, what it is, and basically the idea behind everything here.
Okay, well, it's a hold. It looks like an amateur hold. You have to be an amateur wrestler to know this, but it's called a half Nelson. What it does is you got a guy on his back. You've got both his arms are up like above shoulder level. Like if he was standing up, he'd be reaching for the sky. And you have your hand on top of both his arms, holding them down, and behind his neck, and with your hand that's reaching across behind his neck, but you're holding his tricep on the other arm. If you're on his left side, you'd be holding his right arm above. You keep it above his head by just holding it with your hand. And then what you can do is all you have to do is rotate your hand and lift your forearm, and it raises a person's head. And if you lift them up on their side, where the right side is down, you can crank the head forward. It cuts off all the blood to the head, in and out. The carotid and the jugular artery and vein are closed, and in some cases they go up in 1 or 2 seconds. Sometimes it takes a little longer. I've had people. One guy went out so quick, I thought that he was just. I didn't have it on tight enough, so I cranked it some more, and all of a sudden I noticed his fingertips were turning blue, his fingernails, and I let him go. And managed not to kill him. I've told this story before, but Hiro Matsuda happened to be there and got him up and gave him that external heart massage, a pound in the back.
Right.
And the guy came out of it. But yeah, I did it. It's a great hold because there's no way the guy could hurt you. We did it in Tampa. They had 5 guys, and they were most of them were fairly size. One guy was kind of tall and stringy, but he was like 6'5". And but the thing that was so great about this is that you start out in the hole. Now it's not cranked up yet. You've got their hands up in the air. I mean, they're laying flat. You've got them on their side. You've got the hold in. As soon as they say go, all you got to do is just crank the head forward and put pressure down on their left arm. And sometimes they go right out. Never had, for the first bunch of times I did it, never had anybody get away. But what I did as soon as I could is I quit doing stuff like that, because there's no way that you're not in some way negatively affected by doing that to other people. It had no real place to me in pro wrestling. I mean, one immediate conclusion from any thinking fan, someone who thinks about things, was, you know what? I don't see one wrestler using that hold. If that hold's so great, why aren't more guys using it?
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody ever, they never see anybody using it. But I mean, because it's not a showman type hold. Nothing's happening really. If we're really trying to beat somebody, why isn't somebody trying that hold? So it didn't make much sense. But you're trying to have pro wrestling with all the flamboyance and the moves and the illogical suspended disbelief, and you're putting something in there that's you got to believe what you're seeing there because it's real. When you crank it, as soon as you know the guy's out, you just let go, and the guy's on his side still. All you do when you let go of the hold, all you have to do is just raise back up where you're on your knees, and the guy just flops back on his back, and he doesn't move because he's out. And like 5 seconds ago, he was saying, "Okay, I'm ready," and now he's out. So that's it's pretty impressive because you don't see much. You don't see what's happening.
Right.
It's not like he gets punched or if somebody cover his mouth and his nose where he can't breathe. You can't really tell what's happening. But the bigger guy is, the better. I'd rather do it on Andre than on
more to work with. Correct. Yeah, there's more to work with there. Absolutely. And and that's going to come into play here, I believe, when we get into this story. So basically, you had done some of this for Eddie Graham in the past. We know that. We've talked about it before. Eddie and these sadistic villains of Florida that seem to enjoy these sadist-type things. You've moved away from that for quite a while by this point. And at some point, this comes into Angelo's mind to do this. I'm not sure what he's getting out of this because these fans aren't buying in. They're not paying any amount of money to be part of these challenges. But essentially, they would line up a few guys. They would sign away their life. Literally, they would have to sign a waiver before they would get in the ring with you, Bob. But the story is that they would have an opportunity to attempt to break that sugar hold that you just described here to the people. And again, you can go on YouTube and type in sugar hold. I'm sure there's demonstrations online you guys can look up. And I wouldn't recommend trying it at home. This is where Gordon Soley would step in and say, "Don't try this at home, kids," because this is not something you screw around with. But it's definitely a dangerous hold. It's at some point you go to an arena and this idea is presented to you. And I don't know that you have much of an option to turn it down, but you told me, I believe off air prior, that you had told Angelo this was a terrible idea and that eventually this is going to come back to bite him in the ass.
I'd see a bunch of different promoters toy with the idea, talk to me about it, ask me about it. I told them it was a bad idea. That kind of stuff and pro wrestling are just two completely different things, really. The reason Angelo did it was because it gave him an extra event, not a match, but an event he could put on the advertisement, the so-called Sugar Hole Challenge.
Yeah.
Bob Roop taking on as many as, I'm surprised he didn't say take on 10 people. Yeah. I'm sure that's why he did it. I told him, I said, look, again, I was a babyface, and I couldn't just, smack guys although I really could have, but I didn't think I could. I thought the babyfaces were kind of supposed to act like babyfaces, but
right.
That's why I hated pretend to be a nice guy in the wrestling ring, not in real life. But he insisted on doing it. And shall we go into detail?
Well, I want to get to part of the story here this week. We're probably not going to be able to tell the whole thing, so there's a certain point where we should probably close up shop. But I'm trying to locate the Frankfurt Civic Center is where this took place. June 3rd, 1981. So close to you leaving. What a perfect time for you to exit ICW for the Mid-South Territory. June 3rd, 1981, Frankfurt Civic Center is one of the nights this Sugar Hole Challenge takes place, this event. Again, if anyone can escape, they will receive $1,000 from the miser himself, Angelo Poffo. And on this night, Bob, you walk in there, and there are apparently four fellows from the crowd that decide, I'm going to try this thing out. What's it going to hurt to try to win $1,000? Four men sign up to take on Bob Roop in the ring. Fans, mind you, these are shoot contests, guys. And so just before intermission, they line these four guys up. They all sign away their lives, sign those waivers. I had to do it at a rodeo once when I got whacked by a bull. And so, and so they step in the ring with you one by one in there. And how do they present themselves to you? Do you have them on their knees? How do you go into lock in the Sugar Hole Challenge on these guys?
What I just said, they're in the hole.
Okay.
Isn't that great? You get to put the hold on them to start.
Right.
In amateur wrestling, you both start on your feet even, and you have to get the guy. You have to get the other person down. In this case, they were already in the hole. I don't remember the four. If there were four,
yes,
then the first three, I was successful.
Yes,
with.
You were. So, are you aware that the gentleman, the last man to go up, and we'll talk a little bit more about what happens with that, but are you aware that he has told his version of the story? Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because he talks about these other three gentlemen that were in front of him, and he basically admits the first two, he was watching, and you basically demolished the first two in mere seconds. They were crying like babies, and you put them away, and it became very intimidating watching that happen. But the third guy had mentioned to this fourth man here that he had some training in the military, and he had an idea of what he might be able to do to escape the hold. So he had a plan walking in, and so he lasts roughly 15 seconds, says the fourth man, did this third guy. So after just putting away the first two guys with ease, 15 seconds doesn't sound like a long time, but it is, truly is, especially when you're locked in a hold or any situation like this in wrestling and combat. And so maybe it wasn't 15, I don't know, but this guy seemed to last a little longer. So it's starting to build up into this fourth character here who's about to step in for the Sugar Hole Challenge.
Well, the reason he got away, the guy was small. He's not now, but at the time he probably weighed 120 pounds, and 5'7", something like that. And he had narrow shoulders, and so when I put my hand behind his neck and over onto the other arm, it was loose because my arm is like say 2.5 feet long, and his width from where I was only about 2 feet. So there was from one side to the other, so there was a lot of free space in there. And the other thing is, at least this is what this guy told me later. He came to one of first of all, I talked to him on the phone. I don't remember when, somewhere between then and now, he got in touch with me. But he also came to one of Barry Rowe's Fan Fest in Tampa.
Okay.
I think Barry booked him, and I talked to him down there. So he told me that he was training in the martial arts,
Right.
and what that has no bearing on anything except this. There's a lot of stretching involved. So he was not only small, but he was limber. So when he was, his shoulders would, his elbows would, you could put them behind his head and put them on the opposite sides of one another without breaking his shoulders, because he was limber. He was small and he was limber. So I couldn't get a secure hold on him. And so we got a minute, and he starts wiggling and bucking and wiggling and whatever, and I'm trying like hell to hold on to him. It took about, I don't know, maybe 50 seconds, but I couldn't. I couldn't hold him. He finally he got loose.
Yeah, and he openly admits that he kicked his way free after sliding his head out. So
yeah.
You had told me before that you had mentioned to Angelo that it was bound to happen. Something was going to go awry sooner or later if you keep playing with destiny like this and just going in every day. Even if it's just somebody, like you said, gouging you in the eye by accident, something is going to happen at some point. And this is the point. You get 4 guys in here. You do away with the first 3. This guy comes in there with a background in martial arts, which, again, in this instance, being placed in a sugar hold, necessarily knowing martial arts isn't going to help you by itself escape the hold, but it will certainly help you based on your training in regards to your movements and, as you said, limberness. And so this guy, and being small too, trying to lock in a full Nelson on one of my kids, they can easily slide right out, right? But if I put it in on someone much larger, not so easy.
Yeah, and also being an athlete, a martial artist has got to be an athlete. You got to have a cardiovascular, I don't care if it's karate, judo, whatever. You got to have, the engine, got to be in good enough shape to last however long your match lasts, your combat lasts. So he got away, and what do you do? What do you do? Say he did.
I don't know if I mentioned his name, so I don't want to do any disrespect here. The guy we're talking about, William Harding is his name.
There you go.
I don't remember if I mentioned him at the top of this because we kind of went into the 4th guy, and I let you take over. So I just want to get his name out there. I'm not trying to omit or ignore that and the fact. I mean, hey, he escaped your sugar hold. He deserves to be mentioned here on the show. And so that's kind of where we're at is he escapes the hold, which means he should receive $1,000 from Angelo Poffo. However, according to Mr. Harding, he stands up, and after a moment's time, whoever the referee was decides, well, it's a quick thought. He goes, well, nope, sorry, time's up. You ran out of time. You escaped the move, but it was too little too late. So that was quick thinking on the referee's part. He must have been another Poffo somewhere down the line or something. But unfortunately, it was a no-go. And at first, according to Mr. Harding, he challenged you to put me back in the hold. I'll escape it again. And you declined. I don't know if that happened.
No, I left because I was disgusted.
Okay.
But what happened, I just went back to the dressing room. The guy, he got loose.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? I wasn't going to give him a hand or raise his hand like he.
It wasn't going to serve you any purpose to stand there, happy, mad, shaking his hand, or pissed off. And no matter what you were going to do, it wasn't going to help you in any way. And you were kind of put in this position by Angelo Poffo, so I could see why you were disgusted on many levels because you were basically trying to talk Angelo out of even doing this special attraction. Well, why not go rent a bear for the night, Angelo? I mean, I don't know, but So he states here in his story that he grabbed the house mic, I guess from the ring announcer area, and demand, where's my money? They're trying not to pay him here. At that point, he states that Angelo Poffo sent out Bob Orton Jr. to come out and threaten him. If you don't get out of that ring, Daddy, you might leave it in a body bag or something along those lines. And I try. And I even put the daddy in there. So
I like it.
And so he doesn't listen. He grabs the mic a second time and says, I just want my money. Give me my money. These people owe me money. And then at that point, Angelo sends out some police or security or whatever to bring him back, escort him out of the ring. And Angelo thinks, well, we escaped this. He ran out of time is the story they're telling here. He escaped 1 second too late, and thus he's not owed any money. Now, Mr. William Harding, he doesn't buy that story so much. And so I think that is an excellent time to wrap up this week, Bob, so that we can tell the fun part of what happens next, because I got news for you guys. Much like Ronnie Garvin kept Ron Fuller's money, I'm going to tell you something. Mr. William Harding is going to get paid. And we're going to tell you guys at the top of the next program exactly what transpires involving the local police department and everything else involved.
Yeah, I told you he called me. I don't remember how 20-some years ago, and he told me what happened. We'll talk about that the next time we get together. But he told me but in detail what happened. So yeah, it's funny. I went back to the dressing room, and oh man, Angelo, oh man, you'd have thought that he was going to have to give up his family jewels or something. The way, like I said, earlier in the program, I said it's like he just found out his bank failed and took all his money with it. He was so distressed. Idea of $1,000. Well, we'll get into that next time. But
I just, a brief spoiler. I want everybody to know that this gentleman did get paid, and he went through some means in order to get paid, but he made sure it happened. So I got to give him that. And I can't wait to talk about it. It's a funny story, and it's even funnier when you think about Angelo Poffo and his thriftiness. So it becomes far more comical as it plays out. So I can't wait to get your take on it and everything involved and just the fallout as we're going to kick off next episode discussing that and your last days in the Poffo territory as well as you move on to Mid-South. Now, we've talked about Mid-South in the past, so beyond that, we're going to move on to further in your career, your time with Ole Anderson, working in Georgia and so on and so forth. But right now, we've still got at least one more episode of ICW ahead of us, and I can't wait to get into this part of it.
Well, yeah, me too. It's been fun. It's been nice going. Memory lane hadn't been bad in this one. The All-Star attempt was unfortunate in a way. Now it's easy to look back and say, man, if powers that be, it wasn't just Ron Fuller. I mean, he was in contact with his dad and Lester Welch, and I don't know what kind of contacts he had over there in Memphis. Mm-hmm. But he also had Eddie Graham, was kind of a patron in Florida. So he had all these people as kind of I don't want to say a brain trust or, the people that were, especially with us going opposition, he had all those people to draw on that all of them together, couldn't figure out some way to deal with the situation of what happened, of us going against them. Because we were going against the whole business. It wasn't just Fuller. And we knew that. But that with them knowing that, together, all of them together, couldn't figure out. Now, again, these are some of the same people that were, the adults anyway, not Ron so much, that were in the Atlanta office after Ray Gunkel died, talking about cheating Ann Gunkel out of her share of the promotion. These are the same people who are, that Ron was in not cahoots, but he was of course, Buddy Fuller was his dad, Lester Welch was his uncle, Eddie Graham was I don't know, godfather, whatever, but he was a promoter. All the promoters, accepted him as one of them. So he had a whole core, a cadre of people he could count on. That between all of them put together, they couldn't figure out a way to deal with us without killing the territory. We didn't try to kill the territory. We didn't want to do that. We didn't go out and say it was all work. We did now the Plan B thing.
Right.
It's proof of what I'm saying. That's where we did it. But that tape, that didn't come out for 40 years.
Right.
We sure didn't expose it. That was our big hole card. That was our ace in the hole as far as we thought.
I have a feeling that's also going to be the next episode as well. I'm glad you brought that up. We're going to finish up the Sugar Hole Challenge story. We're going to finish up Mr. William Harding and how he made himself $1,000 that night. We're going to talk about you leaving the territory and what transpired between you and the Poffo family, getting what you rightfully deserved on the way out of the territory, heading down to the Mid-South territory for Bill Watts. And I believe we're going to have time to discuss the Plan B video, all in the next episode. So lots of big things coming up next week.
Well, yeah, little teaser. When I went to get my money, the money that the Poffos owed me, or that ICW owed me, I took weapons with me.
Right.
I didn't take a gun. I took some other weapons with me, because if I had to, I was gonna lay waste.
You were like William Harding. You were gonna get paid. Right.
Yes, I was going to get paid, and I didn't. Now we're going to find out that Mr. Hardin had some help. I didn't have any help.
He had some legal help. You had help, Bob. It was just in different means.
Yeah, well, he had physical help, and I'll explain that next week. But
okay,
yeah, I went to the. Well, if I took somebody with me to go get my money, if I took a couple of people with me, probably would have let me in the house. But that would have been an excuse for him not to pay me. Well, what are you going to do? Beat me up if I don't pay you? Well, anyway, we'll get to that next time.
Yeah. So some fun stories ahead, no doubt about it. We're going to finish up this one about the Sugarhold Challenge. We're going to talk about Bob and what he went through, collecting some cash on the way out of ICW. And then, of course, Plan B. I'm sure a lot of people looking forward to that. I've been asked about it time and time again, and we will finally address it right here next time on the program. So just in time for the holidays, too. So it's going to be a fun little early Christmas present for everyone next week, Bob. And we're going to wrap it up this week, guys. We'll be back soon. Thank you once again, Bob, for so many great stories this week.
Well, thank you, Ray. And thank you out there, our listeners. Thank you for being with us. Please have a happy, safe holiday. Stay well and, be safe. And Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. We'll be talking to you before then, but we can always repeat the greetings.
Absolutely.
Thanks for being with us. Thanks for being with us today. And thank you again, Ray. You're the best.
All right, guys, that's going to wrap things up here this week. But in the meantime and in between time, I encourage everybody to go out there and follow friend Mr. Bob Roop over at facebook.com/poorBobRoop. And you can find me, Ray Russell. Follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. But most of all, I encourage everybody to go over to patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia. So many great gifts there, including early show releases, digital downloads, video casts now available, and so much more. Check it out over at Patreon. Help support the brand. And until next time, on behalf of Bob, we ask you guys to hold tight and see where we head next time. Right here on the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop.